Today, I want to share with you the greatest attempted cover up ever. After Jesus' death on the cross, a member of the Jewish ruling council, Joseph of Arimathea, took charge of the gruesome task of burying the corpse of Jesus. He gained permission from the governor, Pilate, to take Jesus' body down from the cross, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and carried it to his own unused tomb, a cave carved out of a rocky hillside near where Jesus was crucified. Nicodemus, another member of the Jewish council, provided the embalming spices. The biblical accounts say nothing about what happened the day after, which was a Sabbath, a day of rest. But things got hectic on Sunday morning. Earlier, the Jewish leaders had gone to Pilate and asked him to send some soldiers to guard Jesus' grave. Their reason? Well, what if some of Jesus' followers took his body and claimed he had risen from the dead? So Pilate agreed and sent a detachment to secure the tomb. From then on, the Jewish leaders' plan to get rid of Jesus for good began to unravel. Matthew fills us in on the details. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for the angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him, they shook and became like dead men. Then some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests what had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders, they devised a plan to give the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. Can you imagine those big, tough, combat-hardened soldiers frightened out of their sandals? They had been charged with guarding a dead body, but had allowed it to escape. How were they going to explain this to their commanding officer? So, who were the first ones outside of Jesus' closest friends to hear about the empty tomb? It was the very Jewish leaders who had demanded Jesus' crucifixion, and they had heard it from the traumatized guards. Their witness testimony was of an earthquake and an angel who rolled the stone away from the tomb. Then they all blacked out. The Jewish leaders quickly went into spin control and were forced to take extreme measures to cover up the truth that Jesus was alive. After Jesus arose from the grave, his disciples saw him multiple times from his first appearance to the 11 on the night he arose from the tomb and then ascended to heaven several weeks later. The Apostle Paul saw Christ as he was traveling to Damascus to arrest Christians. Paul later wrote the church in Corinth and claimed Jesus had appeared to more than 500 people at one time before he left earth and returned to heaven. From the day of Pentecost, just 50 days after Jesus was crucified, his disciples began carrying out their marching orders from Jesus to go into all the world and preach the good news to all creation. Mark closed his gospel account with these words, "Then the disciples went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it." Over the years, many have tried to cover up the truth of the resurrection. All of this has been a massive hoax contrived by Satan himself to cover up the greatest event in history. Their attempts to stamp out Christianity have not been successful. Just think of the hundreds of millions of believers who celebrated Jesus' resurrection this past Sunday, in spite of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions banning religious meetings. Back in the early years of the 1900s, Nikolai Ivanovich Bukharin was an influential leader in the Russian communist movement. He was an editor of the Soviet newspaper Pravda and a member of the Politburo. Here's an account of a lecture he made in 1930 to a large assemblage in Kiev on the subject of atheism. Addressing the crowd, he began berating Christianity. An hour later, he finished. He looked out at what seemed to be the smoldering ashes of men's faith. "Are there any questions?" Bukharin demanded. Deafening silence filled the auditorium. But then one man approached the platform. He mounted the lectern and stood near the communist leader. He surveyed the crowd from the left and then across to the right. Finally, he shouted the ancient greeting known well in the Russian Orthodox Church. "Christ is risen." The crowd arose as one man, and the response came crashing back like the sound of thunder. "He is risen indeed." Spreading the good news about Jesus' resurrection should still be the mission of all Christians. What else can we say but Christ is risen? And how will you respond? Say it with me. He is risen indeed.